The administration has conceded that the current tariffs on China are unsustainable. What balance do you think can be struck between the U.S. and our biggest economic competitor?
Well, we have a lot of issues to work out. Tariffs are certainly one of them. And I'm, really Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, who I think deserves a lot of credit, because inside the administration, there is a big battle going on about what the policy should be vis-a-vis tariff. Peter Navarro is obviously the champion of tariffing our closest allies and making it long-term and turning it into a significant revenue opportunity for the government. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, believes that any tariff threats or even short-term implementations should be only short-term and should be used to strike deals with other countries around the globe and try to ultimately lower trade barriers and trade costs between countries. Obviously, you know which side I'm on. I'm with Scott Bessent and feel like I don't think we need to threaten these other countries. I think if we just offered to sit down at the table with them, they would happily accept that offer, and we could accomplish a lot of this without the market volatility, the stock market volatility, the bond market volatility, the threat to our economy. We could do all of this without that and get the win, just like we did with USMCA not that many years ago. But certainly there are other issues that we have with China, not the least of which is, China cannot dump products into the United States when we have industries that are trying to grow. I think of the solar panel industry, where for so long China tried to dump it and use it to hurt and almost destroy the domestic manufacturing of solar panels. We have other issues. China still allows precursor chemicals to leave their country and enter Mexico, and then they go into fentanyl labs, and they're made in the fentanyl and crosses the border, and they harm so many American citizens. We need to work together with the Chinese government to stop the transport of precursor chemicals to Mexico and other countries that create this deadly drug. We also still have human rights issues for the Uyghurs, and we can never forget human rights as an important issue in who we decide to do business with. Look, we can't always cut deals with only the countries that have perfect records. We're realists. I'm a realist as well as that. But certainly they have a lot of work to do to improve the condition of the Uyghurs, the domestic minority inside of China. And of course, intellectual property theft is still a major issue when American companies do business inside of China, where they may do a good contract for a short term, but they end up ultimately losing because the intellectual property supporting their business or technology model is lost. Those are all major problems that have to be worked out. Tariff policy is among them. But I think we need strategic tariffs, not across the board tariffs. I don't think that is the right policy, whether it's China or any other country.
Let's thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit about America's readiness. Many local businesses that import goods from around the world are being forced to rethink their business model. Is our country prepared to ramp up domestic production from your perspective?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it depends on the industry. Obviously, when it comes to semiconductor, we're doing great. And that was a very strategic decision by Congress to invest in the Chips and Science Act, and it sent signals to the world that we want this most important industry. And the decision of TSMC to invest more here than anywhere else, not only in the globe, but anywhere in the United States, they chose us here in Arizona for now $160 billion of advanced manufacturing development in semiconductor space. So we're doing great in that regard. But as a practical matter, do we think that there's going to be significantly increased return manufacturing of low-tech manufacturing, not advanced manufacturing, but low-wage manufacturing back in the United States? I don't believe that is the case, and I'm not sure that's the right economic strategy. We should be focused in on being the leaders in advanced industries. We are blessed as the leading economy on planet Earth with a highly educated workforce to be able to lead the world in that regard. And I don't want to be chasing after industries that don't add as much value to our long term to our economy. And so we have to, make sure that we are being very smart about this. Plus, in our Democratic Republican system here, where we vote every 4 years for a new president and a new Congress through our form of government, are companies going to make investment decisions that last in sometimes decades based on a single president's decision to ratchet up tariffs unilaterally across the board? I think these companies they're probably not going to make investment decisions based on the permanency of tariffs because they can't bank on the permanency of tariffs. And so that may not be a smart economic move. The reason they're going to choose the United States is because we have the workforce that we need. I know this chamber works more on workforce than anybody else, building the quality workforce. And do we have the infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, supply chain infrastructure in place so that we can be competitive? That's our competitive advantage, not tariffs.
And thank you for your support of the CHIPS Act. We really appreciate that. Let's drill down into industries a little bit. One chamber member is asking, what are we supposed to do about agricultural goods that are unable to be mass produced in the United States? For example, bananas, coffee beans, so on and so forth. Can exceptions be made for these goods?
Well, I'll answer the last part first. Sure, but the exceptions can be made. But do we really want a tariff policy in which we implement across the board tariffs and then, whoever hires the best lobbyist gets an exception to the deal? That makes the lobbyists very wealthy, but is that really the right economic policy for the United States? Remember when they announced the big China tariffs, and then a week later they said, well, Apple gets all the exceptions, and then the next day said, well, wait a minute, we didn't mean that. Apple doesn't get the exception. I mean, that's not good economic policy based on who can get an exception, who get exception. Although you asked me that question on a very bad day, because I'm very unhappy, like so many in Arizona are, that the Trump administration on the issue of the tomato suspension agreement, which allowed for the importation from Mexico of tomatoes on a large scale, helping Arizona, because so many of them come through Arizona through our storage capacity and moving them. That is big business here in Arizona. And the policy was that we did not have tariff on those tomatoes, and it's seasonality. Sometimes Florida tomatoes are in season and we ship across the United States. When that's not the case, often the Mexico tomatoes are, and we can have fresh tomatoes everywhere in the United States at low cost. Well, they've re-implemented the tariffs on tomatoes from Mexico, which actually hurts us here in the United States and makes the availability of fresh tomatoes, they're much less available throughout the United States. So that is a tremendous issue. And yes, we understand when it comes to agriculture, we're so blessed with that industry here in Arizona, especially in Yuma, the salad basket of the United States, through the massive lettuce industry there. And of course, fruits and vegetables that cross over that border that put food on the table in America is incredibly important. We want to keep those prices as low as possible. And a tariff policy like it's been proposed, is just a massive tax increase on the American people.
Yeah. Let's talk about housing. We've heard from our members that materials for housing are going up. Lumber prices are going up. Other material prices are going up. How are tariffs expected to affect the housing industry from your perspective?
I mean, you mentioned just the construction materials, but what about HVAC, air conditioners? I met with a series of developers today to talk exactly about this issue, about what are the impacts on the tariffs of your industry. They said, yeah, it's not just building materials, it's also all appliances that go into the houses that are in many cases not just more expensive, but in some cases impossible to get. It slows down the entire housing availability, which increases prices at a time that we have a major housing shortage here in the United States. And let's also talk about workforce, because I know we're not talking about immigration policy here on this call, but you can't talk about tariff policy without talking about adopting smart immigration policy that helps to advance the American economy. And some of the immigration policies have forced people to live in fear, and many of them are not showing up at work sites to get the work done, and that moves our American economy behind. And if people are leaving this our community because of fear of immigration enforcement, that's going to have a really bad impact on housing supply in terms of people, the housing values in our community. That's another important issue that we need to think about as well. But yes, the core issue that you asked about, increased costs to build housing because of these self-imposed tariffs, at a time that we are working so hard to adopt policies that reduce the cost of housing. That's self-defeating, and it's another really good reason that we should rethink this tariff policy.
Yeah, you touched on a number of subjects and issues that are related to tariffs. Do you think this trade war will lead to a recession or worse?
Yeah, if we don't ratchet it back, I think a recession, sadly, is virtually inevitable. And don't take it from me. I mean, when Donald Trump first implemented these tariffs, obviously the stock market tanked and we lost about 10% of the value. Could you imagine that? If you're a senior citizen who has saved, you're a teacher or, some other person that's been a public servant, but of modest income, but you saved enough money and you're going to live off that in your senior, your 401k, and you've lost 10% or more of the value of your savings. That's not hypothetical. That's not theoretical. That is a massive impact on your ability to live a retirement with dignity right here in real time. And then beyond that, you saw what happened with the bond market. Look, in times of trouble, the rest of the world looks to the United States and buying bonds in the United States as the safest investment, because the United States is the strongest economy on planet Earth, and we're the ones you can rely on, and we're strong and we're consistent in our policy. Instead, you saw the bond markets go crazy, and we knew that was going to result in us going over the cliff and have a recession or worse. And look, if the markets aren't getting us the real signals and action by the administration that they are going to engage in a rational policy, I think we are heading in that direction. Again, the president needs to explain why we are doing this, which he hasn't really explained. He's given different justifications for it at different times. You can fool some of the people some of the time, but when it comes to the market's going to figure it out, that there really is no plan here, that it's being done kind of willy-nilly, and there's a lot of whiplash going day to day about which direction we are going. And it's so hard for businesses to make long-term investment decisions under those circumstances, and that has a devastating impact on our economy.
You touched on a lot of things in a lot of industries throughout this conversation, and kind of a closing question. What are you hearing from the businesses in your district? I know you had a beer summit with the governor not so long ago. You've been visiting a lot of businesses in your district. You're known as one of the hardest workers in Congress. And what are you hearing from your constituents?
I did working with the Chandler Chamber, which is another great chamber that I'm lucky enough to have to be in my district. We went to small boutiques in downtown Chandler, some of the coolest hip stores. And one of the small business owners there, she has a women's fashion store, it's a really awesome place, indicated that one of their best selling products was a fashion line from Canada. And they simply Canada won't ship it anymore to them to sell in the United States because of cost issues. Look, that's not the biggest thing in the world, but this is totally self-imposed. Why shouldn't people, if they enjoy a particular line of fashion, have the opportunity to enjoy that? And we're just missing out on that opportunity. You can imagine on her bottom line, and she said this was her best-selling line, the economic loss to her for really, in my opinion, no reason, no actual reason. I think these are troubling times. We've got to make some really important decisions as Americans about what our priorities are going to be and how we want to interact with our allies around this globe, and kind of sticking a fork in their eye through unilateral high tariffs I think is not only going to hurt us in the short run, but really hurt us in the long run in terms of our reputation in the international community. And that's important, not just for economics, but also for national security.
Yeah. Congressman Stanton.
All right. Thanks so much. That was great.
We really appreciate it. This concludes the Mesa Chamber's webinar, Talking Tariffs with Congressman Greg Stanton. Thank you for your time and attention today. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, Eric. Have a good one.
Thank you.